I am just so happy you could make this work. I mean, you are a CEO in the middle of a global pandemic running a sports team and you're moving. That's a lot in just one sentence. So I'm so happy we could make this work.
Well, thank you, Crystal. I'm honored that you invited me to join. Glad it worked out.
Great, great. Well, we'll just sort of dive right in because I know people are anxious to hear from you. Tell me, COVID has been a beast for
Yes.
everyone. And you have to tell us what is getting you out of bed on hard days because we've had some really hard days.
Crystal, in a weird way, that question's kind of related to what keeps you up at night. Right? There's sort of two sides of the same coin.
Mm-hmm.
And, if I think about it, I sleep pretty well.
Okay.
And almost every day I look forward to that day. And I think the reason is I'm in a profession and a role that I love. The old saying that says, if you find a job you love, you'll never have to work a day in your life.
Yeah.
That's kind of been my mental model since I was a little kid.
Wow.
If you think about it, look, after you get to some minimal amount of income, so that you can have a safe place to live and food. And sadly, not enough people in this country get to that level. But once you get above that level, then my mental model, I got this from my dad, I think, is choose your role based on something you're passionate about or something that you can really learn that will stretch you.
Wonderful.
Don't choose, which I think too many people do, based on status or based on maximizing your income. And that means in some sense, I haven't maximized every single dollar in my career, but I think I'm a much more well-rounded person. I'm certainly happier. And a couple of side effects from that, and one of which might be interesting to some of the viewers, which is I have a pretty unusual resume. If you look me up on LinkedIn, I have what I call a jagged resume.
Yeah.
There are at least 2 or 3 times, if you look at my career, you go, how the heck did he go from there to there? And it was because of those stretch things. It was because I don't know if I know how to do this job. Somebody was willing to take a risk on me.
Yeah.
And that's frankly what I look for when I hire people.
Wow. Well, that's sort of what I find fascinating about you. We met and we talked at the height of so much of the social unrest, but I was struck by the fact that you sort of ended up in this role and it wasn't like something you had this great plan for. And so how did you end up running a sports team?
Yeah, it seems kind of strange, doesn't it? Right? I've always been a sports fan, but I don't come from a sports background. So I seem like an unlikely person to run a sports team. So sometimes I tell people, when you're a little kid, some people say, I hope I become an astronaut. Some other people say, I hope I become a doctor. I didn't say I'm going to run a professional sports team. That's not what happened. One thing that did happen, though, is I grew up in a small town and I went to a small school.
Okay.
And so I got to play 4 different sports, not because I'm a fantastic athlete, but because the environment taught you that you get to try anything. I fell in love with sports and how it works. So I've been a fan of lots of different sports over time. And in each role, I always found a way to blend sports. People always talk about work-life trade-offs. So I always figured, how can you integrate the two together? Not try to force them to be separate. How can I add a sports flavor to it?
Wow.
And probably the biggest example of that was I was the head of marketing of an analytics company, a company called Business Objects. And we were trying to figure out how to sell analytics, which is a fancy word for math, to small businesses, things like grocery stores and restaurants and dry cleaners. And Crystal, it just doesn't work. You go into a restaurant and say, I'm going to give you math to help you choose what that should be on the dinner menu.
Right.
The owner says, I don't need math. I know what people want. But it turns out math can help.
Yeah.
So we had this aha, because that was back when people started talking about Moneyball and baseball in particular. And I said, what if I chose a similar thing? What if I drew some scenarios and asked people in sports, do you think this pitcher is going to strike out this batter on 2 days rest in a cold weather, blah, 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 blah. And they would tell me confidently, yes. And then I would show them, no, it didn't. And then apply the same thing to restaurants or grocery stores. And I could show people that the emotions of sports were similar to the emotions of business.
Wow.
And that math might help. Anyway, this went on for a few years. I got deeper into the business side of how sports teams work. And as I said, followed by passion. The next thing I know, almost 3 years ago today, I ended up at the Sharks, which is fantastic. I've been a fan for almost 30 years, been a season ticket holder for 15 years. So I'm almost back to little kid Giddy doing this again.
But you've maintained some of those values that have been consistent, right? So it's been passion, but I'm also hearing that you have this leadership skill of building teams and teamwork. Now, I know right now you are leading a sports team during a global pandemic. Like,
It's tough.
what is that like? I mean, just talk to us a little bit about what that's been like. If there's a leader listening and they're trying to lead their company or organization during this moment, I'm certain you have some tips for them. I know you do, Jonathan.
So maybe the first thing that I always remember is it's pretty easy to lead during good times.
That's right.
Right? Another saying, right? Rising tide rises all boats.
Mm-hmm.
The true test of a leader is what you do during difficult times. And frankly, I think what leaders are doing now will pretty much define their entire careers.
Mm-hmm.
And the first 3 months of the pandemic, where nobody really knew anything,
mm-hmm.
right? Lots of people scrambled to figure out what was going on.
Mm-hmm.
And the signal actions we did was what's most important is our people.
Mm-hmm.
Not just the people that work for us, because there's, I don't know, a couple hundred full-time workers, but the 1,800 part-time workers that work for us as well.
Yeah.
And one of the very first things we did is we said, we're going to pay people for the events, even though the events didn't happen. Our season got shortened. And so we paid out part-time workers. We raised a fund and said, look, they still got to eat. They still got to make their payrolls. They still got to do things as well. Let's take care of them. And one of the things I knew that I love this organization is I went back to ownership and he asked me a bunch of questions. None of the questions were about money. All the questions were about people. Are we protecting this? Are we good for long term?
Mm-hmm.
And so having that thought process of being people first is really what kept me actually going.
Wow.
But if I was, sorry, I'm going to interrupt you. If I gave one piece of advice, and that is, remember that there's a temptation, and I know lots of teams do this,
mm-hmm.
to severely cut back when you're going in the midst of an economic crisis. But severely cutting back means you're not going to be set up well when things come back again.
Mm-hmm.
So we've resisted that for as long as we possibly can and focused on the future and not the particular day.
Awesome. So people matter to you. In your leadership style, people matter. People are everything. I mean, that's good.
I was going to say, yeah, not only matter, they are the heart and soul. There almost is nothing else other than the people of an organization. I believe we're in a people business.
Yeah.
Frankly, Crystal, I think we could agree that virtually every company out there is really a people company, but for sure, the entertainment and the sports businesses are.
Definitely, definitely. Well, we connected this summer around right after the George Floyd's death. And, we had a really candid conversation about where the country is, where sports players are. The work you're doing?
So look, we're in a weird year, not because of COVID, just because of COVID, social unrest. But I would say respect for people, no matter who you are, is deep in our culture, right? I said we're a people company, and it starts from ownership.
Mm-hmm.
And, I struggle for the right term sometimes, because the term, it's not just diversity, because diversity means having lots of different people of different backgrounds at the table. But if you only listen to a few of them, you're diverse, but you're not very inclusive.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So you can be inclusive as well, but we've been focusing more and more on the word belonging.
Mm-hmm.
And our mantra for the last couple of years, our fans know, has been teal together. Teal's the color of our company. It's the color of our uniforms. And how do we get everybody under the umbrella of teal together? And I'd say we've done pretty good things over the last couple of years. We march regularly in the Pride Parade. We help celebrate Indian Heritage and History Day. One of the very first players on our team in 1991 when we started was one of the early Black players in the NHL, Dale Craigwell.
Mm-hmm.
Evander Kane, who's on the current team now, has founded the Hockey Diversity Alliance with a few other people as well. We've done stuff, but I'd say it's not nearly enough.
Mm-hmm.
And the challenge is I'm not much of a fan for statements. Frankly, a lot of people put out statements, and I worry those statements feel hollow.
Yeah.
The key is not so much the words, but the actions that back them up.
Mm-hmm.
We've done some interesting things, I think, in the last 6 or 9 months. As an example, we heard from the city of San Jose and the county of Santa Clara that it's tough sometimes to test COVID vaccines on some underrepresented minorities. So we hosted a free walk-up COVID testing site where you don't have to register ahead of time. You just show up, get tested, and within a couple hours find out whether you've got COVID or not. That's more likely that people show up because they don't have to take time off of work, et cetera. We hosted a Get Out the Vote campaign together with the secretary, and we hosted 2 drop-off ballot boxes. We have a nonprofit foundation that focuses on education and youth. But I would tell you, as proud as I am of what we've done, if this is a hockey game, we're still very early in the first period. We have a long way to go. Frankly, as a country, we have a long way to go.
Well, I have to say, I think people can really learn from you. I mean, the leadership you've demonstrated is you jumped in, right? You've connected with the community. You've tried to provide ample opportunity and space for the people that work with you. Do you feel called to lead the Sharks during this time? Because you said it earlier, we'll look back and say, how did we lead during a crisis? Do you feel a sense of calling in this moment?
I do. It's funny. I didn't plan my career as we talked about. It's not like I can say early on in the pandemic, somebody asked me in one of these things, what in your career has prepared you for this moment? And the answer is nothing and everything. I mean, I'm not 100 years old, so I didn't go through the Spanish flu pandemic. None of us really did, or maybe there's a few people left. The question is, are you emotionally prepared for this? Our doors were shut on March 8th, and they haven't reopened. And odds are they won't reopen for several more months. And so all the plans we had for 2020 are gone. It's like the old Mike Tyson quote, right? What's that quote? Everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. So we were essentially punched in the mouth. And so what I've tried to do is go from planning to scenarios, sketch out things that might happen, from going from operational rigor of really trying to figure out every single point of view to how to be more flexible and more inspirational. We've done a lot of fun things like bring in a Navy SEAL to talk about resilience, bring in a futurist to talk about how the world might be in 10 years, bring in someone who specializes about happiness to have her talk about how you can find happiness in this time. But I can tell you, if there's a single moment that sort of defined I'm up for this task, that made me feel better about what's going on, it was probably 3 months, I'd say, into the pandemic. Yeah, because it was right before my birthday, and my birthday's in late June. I think the adrenaline of leading had started to worn off, right? Whenever you get into this crisis situation, you get overcome with a bit of adrenaline. You just kind of move for a while. 3 months is a long time for that adrenaline.
That's right.
And an individual contributor in the organization asked to talk to me. So, of course, I said yes. And so we talked for a couple of minutes, and I could see she was a bit hesitant to speak her mind. And finally she did. And she said, can you do me a favor and tell me what's really going to happen? How are we going to get out of this? I can handle the truth. Now, of course, I don't know the answer to that. I don't know what's going to happen next. Even today, I can't tell you when we're going to reopen for hockey. COVID's still a big unknown here in Santa Clara County. But to me, that was a rallying cry of I need to increase my leadership even more. I had to add, we have something we call the pioneering principles. They're essentially the values that we run by. I had to add more radical transparency to what we do. To not just say what you mean and do what you say, but say what things you don't necessarily know about. And so one of the things I did as part of that is created an Ask Jonathan session, a very off the cuff, where people are encouraged to ask me any question whatsoever, and I'll give them the answer, even when the answer is, I don't really know, but here's what I believe. And that move towards radical transparency has helped. It's not perfect because I don't have the answers, but I tell people as soon as I know anything.
I think that's amazing. And I think people appreciate the fact that you can acknowledge you don't know.
Yes.
We're going to walk this out together. And I believe that goes a long way. My final question, Jonathan, is, you lead a sports team, guys, men.
Yep.
What is your one hope for men? I know you probably are thinking about your players, but in this moment, this is a crisis. There's a lot of uncertainty. People are trying to pivot and figure out their next step. What's your one hope for men in this moment?
If I was going to reinterpret your question from men to mankind, I'd give some answer like equal opportunity or access to healthcare or food, but I know you mean men.
Yeah.
And I think more than anything else, men need to learn the skill of empathy. Women are fantastic at it, Men were hit and miss when it comes to that. We see things almost in tunnel vision, and empathy is seeing things from somebody else's point of view, right? There's this famous experiment, maybe not everybody knows it, about rats in a cage, and they actually would rather free other cage rats than eat the food that's readily available to them. That's empathy. That's seeing somebody else's situation. I mean, I grew up, as I said, in a small town. I'm decidedly middle class. That means I experience the world differently than others, right? It doesn't mean that my reality is wrong. It's just incomplete. And if I don't do the work to understand somebody else's point of view, then I haven't grown as a human being. And so to men out there, learn to listen, learn to not just listen, but to understand and try to figure out someone else's point of view. We aren't very good at it. It's not natural. But the same way you can get bigger muscles if you're in the gym and practice that, you can get better at empathy if you practice it as well.
Awesome. Oh my gosh. I think we can all benefit from that lesson of being empathetic. Jonathan, thank you so much. I am so appreciative of your time and happy that you could join us and share words of wisdom. And I'm sending all the good energy and vibes to you as you figure out this transition in the middle of COVID. And I'm looking forward to attending another game when the world opens back up.
We would all love that, Crystal. I appreciate it. Can I leave you with one thought?
Sure, please do.
In my mind, coronavirus is not the most contagious thing around. It's optimism. So let's focus on that.
That's right. And we'll get through this. Jonathan, thank you so much. And we're cheering for you.
Thanks again.
Take care. Bye-bye.